Hi, I'm Emily Philbrick, and I am going to talk to you a little bit about the genre flip assignment, and in particular, what I do in class to prepare students for the genre flip assignment. This is the last assignment that we do in my English 1010 classes. So you'll notice on the other half of this slide here, I've broken this presentation down into an explanation of the project, what students are doing before they come to class, or the homework that they did before they came to class, and then what we actually do in class. So each of the parts of this presentation are actually hyperlinked on this slide, so you can just jump around and look at things as they interest you. And of course, you could go through the whole slideshow in order as well. You're going to notice here also that I have quite a bit listed under what we do in class. That's because I tend to teach 3-hour class sessions so we can get quite a bit done. But I'll also address how I break this up when I teach classes that meet twice a week for those hour and 15 minutes. So I'll do my best to present both methods here. So the genre flip assignment is the last assignment that students do in my English 1010 classes. So they've had quite a bit of practice at this point doing things like rhetorical analysis. We do a lot of reading like a writer, so reading texts to notice patterns, what works, what doesn't work, things like that. So some of the things that you'll see in the assignment prompt leading into this class period and some of the things that we do in this class period are certainly reliant on a lot of semester-long work building up to a more involved understanding of how to rhetorically analyze a text and then use those choices to make your own effective writing choices, or use rather what you observed as you read text to make your own effective writing choices. So you're going to see that it's building on a lot of those skills. So for the project itself, what I'm really looking for them to do is to demonstrate not that they can make the most amazing they have lots of choices about things that they can do. So I'm not looking for them to make like the most amazing Instagram post or TikTok video or op-ed piece or something like that. They can choose to do any of those things, but what I'm really looking for in this assignment is that they can explain and justify the choices that they've made based on their audience, their purpose, and whatever genre they've decided to compose in. So they're basically taking the assignment, their research essay, which they would have done in project number 4, so the project directly preceding this one, and they are keeping the argument that they've made, but they're revising it for a new audience and a new genre. And sometimes, of course, if your audience changes enough, your purpose might change a little bit as well. So we talk about that, and that's a big part of the assignment prompt. I do have the assignment prompt linked here, so you can absolutely take a look at that assignment prompt if that is useful to you. Use whatever parts of that are helpful. So let's see. Oh yeah, and then of course, yeah, so it's not just the genre flip that they're doing, taking what they've already written about and turning it into an argument that's in a different genre for a different audience. But the big part of this assignment really is that explanation of choices, where we practice explicitly identifying choices that we've made using research from, or rather using evidence from their own work, their own text that they create, and linking it to things like their audience research and their genre research, which is stuff that we do in class. And I'll talk about that a little bit in following slides. So before this class session, students have 2 assignments that they complete. Again, that's for my classes that meet for 3 hours once a week. They would do both of these assignments before class. For my classes that meet twice a week for an hour and 15 minutes each, they would do one of these for one day and then the other one for the other day. So they start with the read project number 5, prompt and respond. This is something that they do at the beginning of all of our major projects for the class. And so by the time they reach this major project, they're very comfortable and very familiar with and used to doing this assignment. So they always have a link to the instructions in this assignment. So they read the instructions, and then they have a couple of options about how they respond in the discussion thread. So they can ask a question about a specific part of the assignment prompt. I actually cut this part of the assignment prompt out, but I always give them an example of what it looks like to post a successful response to this particular prompt. I cut that out because there was just too much, it would take up too much space on this slide. But they do have an example. So they can ask a question, a really specific question. They can answer somebody else's specific question if they know the answer. They can offer a resource. So I don't know if you can read the tiny type here on the slide. I had to shrink it way down to make it fit on the slide. But they're given a couple of ideas about what kinds of resources they might decide to share. So since this is a genre flip assignment, a lot of students like to do something like an Instagram carousel or something like that. And so students might post links to helpful tips and tricks about how to do an Instagram post or something. But they can also, so they can ask a question, they can offer a resource. The other thing that they can do is make a connection between other materials that we've read for the class or watched for the class, other activities we've done in the class, or other major assignments that we've had. And they can make a connection between the things that we've worked on and this new final project as well. So kind of helping them to transfer those skills that we talked about earlier in the semester to later in the semester, if they so choose to take that approach. So that's the first thing that they do. The second thing that they do is analyze a past project and share first ideas. And for my classes that meet an hour and 15 minutes twice a week, I might actually split this into 2 assignments where I ask them to analyze a past post for the first class period and then share their ideas for the second class period. That's another way that I might split that up. But when they analyze past projects, I give them quite a significant list of past projects that they can look at. I've only included, I really shortened the list again so it would just fit on the slide. I've included just what that looks like, a chart where I have hyperlinked to various, I think I include like 8 to 10 in this assignment, but various past projects that have been successful projects. I also include the audience and the genre because we're really focusing in this project especially on choosing a specific popular audience and making choices based on that popular audience, and then writing in a genre of their choosing that's appropriate for their audience, their purpose, and their message. So they get to look through those. They choose a couple to really pay attention to, and then one to analyze. And I ask them, so I've already identified for you the audience for that particular project. What clues in that project do you see that would help you figure out this audience? Or how does this author or this creator of this content appeal specifically to this audience? So we're continuing to practice reading like a writer, which is a skill set that they've worked on all semester by this point. I also have given them the genre. So I ask them also to look for clues about conventions particular to that genre. How did the content creator use what they know of the genre to make informed choices, right? So they're practicing, again, identifying really specific parts of the text and parts of the rhetorical situation for that text, audience, purpose, genre, things like that. Oh yeah, and that's the last part, is you're not told the purpose of the project, right? So they get the audience, they get the genre, I tell them those parts, and they look for clues. Then they have to kind of look for clues and figure out what they think the purpose was, just based on what they see in that in that text there. So they go through and they analyze one of the past projects from a past student, and then they share their own ideas. So what popular audience do you think you want to compose for this final project? Why would this audience care about your topic? We talk a lot about that in project number 4. So by the time they reach this project, they're really familiar thinking about audience the stakes that particular audiences have in a conversation, in an argument, in a topic. So I'm asking them to think about that for this new audience. And can this audience do anything about the topic? Because we are focusing on persuasive writing at this point as well, especially in project 4. So we're carrying that over into project number 5. Which genres are most relevant to this audience? Where do they go to get their information? And they're going to spend much more time working on this in class. So this really is just meant to be first ideas, get it on paper, and we'll work from there type of a thing. And then which genre flip examples look most like something that you would want to create? So those are the assignments that they do leading into the class period. So this is what it actually breaks down into, what it looks like in class. And as I mentioned, because I tend to teach the 3-hour long classes, I'll present this in the way that I would present it in a 3-hour long class, but I've also broken it up into the first day and the second day. And of course, classes move at different paces, so sometimes part of what's listed under first day or first half of the class gets carried over a little bit into the second half of the class, and I do try to kind of give a little bit of buffer room for that kind of flexibility, because different classes talk longer, do things, longer or quicker or things like that. But for the first half of the class or the first day, if it's a class that meets twice a week, we address the questions that they shared in their discussion post. I introduce an audience analysis chart, and we begin the audience analysis process. We begin doing audience research based on some of that analysis. On the second day or the second half of class, we then do genre research, and they present to a small group their genre research and get some feedback on that. So in the following slides, I'll go through each part of the class period and discuss what we do during that section. So the first thing that I have students do is open up their discussion thread post about questions or comments, responses, resources, connections to this project, right? So that very first prep assignment that I showed you. So they open that up, they remind themselves of their own questions or resources or responses or connections that they can make. Then they get into a group with a few other people, and each person shares what they posted. If they didn't post, I prompt them to kind of think on their feet, talk to their other group members about the assignment a little bit, and see if they can come up with some questions. And then each group writes 2 to 3 questions on the board. And then as a class, we go through and we discuss each of those questions. And as we do that, that gives them also the chance to, as we're talking through different parts of the project, to share out other things that they may have included in that post as well, such as the connections to other assignments and resources that they shared out. And if anybody shared out a particularly great resource, I'll make sure to include that, usually in a slide, or mention it in class and point everybody to that post so that they have access to that as well. This usually leads to a pretty good in-depth discussion. Again, we do this with every assignment, so they're pretty familiar with this. It's a routine in the class every time we're starting a major project. But I'm really impressed with the level of questions. Definitely the level of questions gets better as we discuss this in class, compared to what they just post in the discussion thread. They kind of start there, but through the conversations that they have with their peers, and then of course they're allowed to and encouraged to ask questions as we discuss in class, and that's when we really start to get some great in-depth questions, thinking through some of the more challenging parts of the assignment. After we've discussed questions, and by the way, that usually, again, it depends so much on the class, but I usually set aside about 15 to 20 minutes for that discussion. It can take a little while, and that's for any of my major projects. But then I introduce this audience analysis chart, and they do have a link to the chart in that week's module. So they'll go ahead and open up the chart. I'll explain the chart, And then the next couple of slides are actually geared towards helping them start to fill out this chart. So this is the audience analysis chart. I'm happy to share this out with anybody if anyone is interested, but they list their primary popular audience. Then they list assumptions that they have about relevant values and interests, relevant goals, relevant obstacles, relevant pain points, and where they go to get their information, or where they think their audience goes to get information. What's your reasoning? Why do you believe this? Why do you have this assumption? What research question can you ask to test your assumption? So, for example, if that, like, one of the things that always happens is if students are writing for any audience that is older than them, they tend to say, where do they get their news? Facebook, right? It's like, okay, maybe make sure that you test that assumption. So they might ask a question like, where do parents of college students go to get their news? And then we'll talk about how you can use that research question to learn more about the audience. But for project number 4, the project right before this, we talk a ton about assumptions. And so I really use that conversation about assumptions that we had during project number 4 to help students think carefully about the assumptions that they might have about their target audience for project number 5. So we're really doing a deep dive into assumptions at this point, really practicing identifying our own assumptions, questioning those assumptions, and going out to either verify or change our mind about what our audience knows and doesn't know and what they like and all those kinds of things. And then because this is research, they do have to include a link to a source to show that this isn't just stuff that they're coming up with, that they've actually done their due diligence. So that's the chart that they will fill out throughout the process of this class. So the first thing that students do is they pause and they reflect on what they think they already know about the audience. Those assumptions that they have that they're either going to verify or change throughout the process of the class period. So I give them some ideas about, some things to focus on. Again, this is referring to the chart. So what do you think you know just off the top of your head? And what I encourage them not to question their assumptions too much at this particular point, because what I also want them to do is start to recognize that they do make assumptions about their audience. So even if they say, I don't think I know anything about this audience, well, what comes to mind when you think about that audience, right? So pushing them to really linger with their own assumptions for a moment to kind of identify that they have assumptions and that those assumptions are impacting the way that they're thinking about their audience. So that's where we begin. This does take students a little while. Sometimes, depending on the class, how quickly they get into things or how much they need to discuss, I might have students first do a little bit of discussing with a partner and then move into this, or if it's a class where they tend to work better to start doing this and then discuss later, I might do it that way, depending a little bit on, the chemistry of the class and how that class tends to work through projects like this. In project 4, the previous project, we also, as we were talking about assumptions, we talked a lot about your claim also has to be attached to reasoning. So they're used to thinking about assumptions. They're used to attaching reasoning to claims at this point. And so we're drawing on that skill set that we're developing as we do this part of the in-class activity as well. So once they've listed their assumptions, what they think they know about their audience, then they find a partner and they talk through their assumptions and their reasoning with their partner. And I really encourage them at this point, as they're listening to their partner share their assumptions and their reasoning for those assumptions. Why do you think this about your audience? To really ask those kinds of critical thinking questions that will help their partner identify when an assumption isn't really founded on something, concrete about the audience. It's maybe they haven't actually had a lot of interactions with this particular audience or something like that. So I challenge them to ask each other questions as they do this sharing. And then after they've really talked through their assumptions and their reasoning, they go ahead and add that to their audience analysis chart. And then we use that to help us prepare to do some audience research. So, as they're preparing to do the research, they turn their assumptions and their reasoning into researchable questions. So, this is like if they think that their audience gets their news on Facebook, that's where they go for everything, right? Then they might ask, like, how do parents of college students use Facebook? Or what is the typical age range of people that consistently use Facebook for news purposes? Or where do people in this age range look for their news? So they come up with a couple of different ways to ask those questions. By this time, we've already done our research project, and so they're aware that we're asking questions that we genuinely want to know the answers to. We're testing our assumptions here. We're not trying to just validate assumptions. So we've done some work on how to ask those types of questions, and also that creating good researchable questions is a process of experimentation and trial and error some too. So we kind of have built up our resilience knowing that we'll probably need to make some changes to questions that we ask as we go along. But again, this is very much by this point in the activity, students are kind of going back and forth between doing their thinking, writing things down, and discussing with each other their ideas. And so as they're trying to kind of figure out their questions and things like that, they're sharing ideas with one another, and helping one another out, and of course calling me over, and I'm giving them some real-time feedback on the types of questions that they're coming up with at this point too. Once students have come up with their questions, then they move on to actually using those questions to research their audience. So at this point in the activity, this is where some students are going to start to move a lot more quickly through the activity, and some students are going to be moving much more slowly through the activity. So at this point, I'm usually letting them know, if you're ready to move on to the next step, I'm going to give us some information about the next step. If you're still working on your questions, don't rush that process. Stick with working on your questions, and you can do this audience research on your own or jump into the audience research whenever you're ready. So this is where you really start to notice, kind of a divide in how you split up the time with this activity. But since it is something that they're doing on their own and then talking to other people, it does work well as an activity where I can kind of be circling around the room and talking to people at whatever stage they are at the activity, and kind of helping them out and offering resources and suggestions, and they can help each other out, depending on how quickly they're moving through the activity. So they try out their research questions. Again, they know that research questions, it's a process of experimentation, trial and error. So they might have to rephrase a couple times until they're starting to find the types of information that they're really looking for. I really stress that audience information needs to be quite recent, because the world changes. And as the world changes, people change, right? So something from 15 years ago about college students as an audience is not necessarily going to be super helpful now, right? I direct them to marketing and advertising firms. I usually show them one or two to let them know what that actually looks like, what those sites look like, and what kinds of audience research resources they can offer. And so this is something that I really tend to help direct them towards as I'm walking around the classroom as they're doing this part. And so this again goes in their audience analysis chart, and they are also thinking about, what did you learn about your audience, and you're adding your research to the chart and including those URLs. Again, just to kind of drive home that we might start with an assumption, but that's not where we end with our knowledge. We're always backing that up with research, with sources that either corroborate what we already thought or push us in a new direction. So they're continuing to fill out their chart at this point. And this would be where I would end. Probably they would need to finish the audience research and the analysis chart as homework. If this was one of those 1 hour 15-minute classes, this is the point where we would wrap that up. So one of the things that students were researching as they researched their audience was what types of texts are most relevant to this audience and would best fit their messaging and their purpose. Where does the audience go for this particular kind of information? So they've had a chance to start to think about that already. And now we move into genre research. Again, this would be the second part of a 3-hour class or the second day of a class that meets twice a week. So they do some genre research by finding 3 sources. So I'll just kind of read what's here. Now that you've learned about your audience and have made a genre choice based on your audience, research your new genre by finding 3 effective examples of the text created in that genre. And I encourage them to find examples that were actually written for their target audience, or at least that their target audience is part of the audience. Even if it's, not always a primary part, it's similar enough that it's going to be an effective example for them. So they can find things like how-to resources, and I'll usually show them how easy it is to find how-to resources, especially if they've chosen to do some kind of like Instagram post or YouTube video or TikTok video or something like that. There are so many. How do you drive, your engagement numbers up on a TikTok video or something? So that's a how-to source, and I'll show them how easy it is to find that. I should also mention here that I really encourage students to not. So a lot of students choose to use some kind of social media platform for this, and I encourage that. I think that's great. But I do encourage them. Well, I require them. Strongly encouraged by requiring that they identify genres within that social media platform. So it's not enough to say I'm making a TikTok video. You need to be able to identify different types of TikTok videos and identify the particular kind of TikTok video that you want to make, or whatever social media platform. They're not required to do it, to do this genre flip as something for social media. They have other options, and some students always take those other options as well, such as an op-ed piece or something like that. But many students do choose to do, like, Instagram is really the most popular one that they choose to do. So we talk a little bit about how you figure out what the genres are for your particular social media platform. Just, what are the most popular types of TikTok videos? You're going to get lists, and that's not going to call them genres because they're not writing these lists for people in, English 1010. But people in English 1010 can use these lists. So those lists, the types, right? Type means genre in this instance. And so they do a little bit of research first to just figure out what the different genres are in the platform that they're interested in. If they're doing something like an op-ed piece, they have to choose a specific publication where that would appear. And that is something that I have to remind them of quite a few times. But again, we're doing this kind of research and stuff in class where I can go over and talk to them. So as they're looking for their sources, and I talked to them about what how-to sources might be. They might be submission guidelines. They might be how to write for the New Yorker. They might be TikTok best practices, or how to drive, audiences to your Instagram, whatever it is. We talk about a couple different ways to find information about genres. They also can find 2 effective examples and 1 how-to source. So that's where I give them a little bit more information about what a how-to source is. And then we, of course, talk more about, platforms and genres. Okay. So, and then they use all of this genre research. They collect that, and then they will be sharing that with a couple other people in the class and getting some feedback. And that's what I'll talk about in this final slide. So the last step is after they do their audience research and their genre research, they share what they found with a couple people. Usually I do groups, no more than 5. Usually there's 3 or 4 people per group, and each person shares. They share their topic. So what were they originally writing about in project 4? Has that changed at all now? It shouldn't have changed a ton, but maybe it changed a little bit for their new audience and their new genre. Why did they choose their new audience? What did they learn about their new audience through research? So we're using that analysis chart to help us have this conversation. What genre are they going to work with? And then share at least 2 examples of this genre and identify a few conventions. And this is the part where students really help each other out. And I love this because we've been talking about genre and conventions all semester long. But because we've mostly been working in academic genres by this point, a lot of there are some conventions and things that just come up over and over and over again, and it can be a little bit like, yeah, we get it, right? But now when they start to look at different genres that they actually interact with on a regular basis, many of them choose a genre that they tend to interact with on a regular basis. And they have to then start to identify those conventions and think through what conventions they're going to use and why. That tends to be, at least for some students, a real aha moment of the semester, where they start to realize how all of the things that we've been talking about all semester click and work for them in their real life, right? And so this is the point where different skill levels become fairly clear in the conversation. So different, comfortability with thinking in depth about genre. Students help each other out a lot, identifying conventions. We have good conversations. I love the conversations we have as students kind of start to notice the patterns. We talk about conventions as patterns a lot. As they have this part of their conversation. And then as they're listening, so when they're presenting, they present all of this, as they're listening, they really, again, ask those critical thinking questions of one another to help push each other to clarify thoughts, to do extra research if they're still kind of operating on assumptions, to really do a deeper dive into a particular platform's genres and things like that if they haven't done that already. And as they're doing this, it's a very collaborative class, so they know at this point, write notes, take notes as you're listening to other people's ideas too, right? Because somebody else may have a really cool idea that you just hadn't thought of. Usually during these conversations, at least 1 or 2 people decide to change their genre. That's okay, because the whole point is thinking it through, right? So if you decide at this point that your originally chosen genre doesn't quite fit your audience and purpose, then yes, by all means, please do change it. So what this ultimately helps them do, so this is how I wrap up. This would be the last part of a 3-hour class, or the last thing we do on the second class period of a week. And this is directly related, and I really stress this to them, this is directly related to the part of project number 5 where they have to explain their choices. They're going to have to use the audience research that they collected in that analysis chart in their explanation of choices. They're going to have to use the examples and or the how-to source that they collected during their genre research in that explanation of choices. So all of the work that we're doing at this point is stuff that they are immediately applying to project number 5. So this is what I do. If you would like any extra information about anything, if you want me to share out slides or anything else at all, I am super happy to share out any resources. You can email me for any resources, philbree@pgcc.edu, of course. But yeah, awesome. Thank you guys for watching this.